Greetings, Traveler. Welcome back to the fire. This marks the third episode of our Crimson Pilgrimage series, leading up to the Red Gods campaign found in the Hallowtide miniature game. If you're interested in the game, quick play rules are available as a free download from Blacksite Studios. So far, on this pilgrimage, we've encountered pigs, born half in and half out of this world, unfortunate musicians tuned to nocturnal frequencies, and today we run with a truly monstrous pack. This is Winter's Teeth, written by Christopher Bunge and performed by Sam Hewlett.
This is Winter's Teeth, Crimson Pilgrimage, Episode 3. It was supposed to be a simple wolf hunt. 3 silver moon pieces for every wolf pelt brought in. The bounty had been increasing since the creatures had been killing sheep and some guard hounds, but just last week the beasts had killed a mother and her young son that had been caught out on the roads. The 4 men were all experienced hunters. They had all killed wolves in their time. Big Bernard often bragged about killing the beast of Gilspur, a canine monster he swore was the size of a bear with tusks like a southern Dunbar. But as the small hunting party looked up at the ridge, the beasts that stared down at them, their eyes filled with something more hateful than animal hunger, weren't what any of them had expected. While they were the shape of wolves, their fur was the deep ruddy crimson of clotted blood. Their mouths, hanging open and leaking thick threads of drool, were filled with multiple sets of jagged canine teeth. Aside from base similarities, each one was marked with unique mutations. One had a set of secondary ears below its primary, another a bulging, distended left eye, while its right was grown over with a sheath of warped skin. A third possessed a small toothed cavity that resembled a premature mouth in the side of its throat, and it exhaled a thin whistle as the creature breathed. At the center of the line of mongrel beasts was the Alpha, a creature that stood a good hand and a half taller at the shoulder than any of its brethren, and at its side was a third pair of vestigial legs that curled up tight against its torso, but whose digits clutched and released with excitement to prove they were more than dead flesh. Ludolf was the first to shoot, bringing the muzzle of his rifle to bear and firing at the first one. While the man was normally a steady aim, his hands were shaking from adrenaline, and the ball went wide as the leader shucked left. Letting out a ragged howl, the pack charged down the incline in rough formation, eating up the distance with quick bounds. Alwyn was next to fire, and despite his youth and relative inexperience, he spared an extra moment to slow his breathing and pick his shot. The pistol roared out into the night, and the creature with 4 ears dropped as the side of its neck exploded in a burst of gore. Bernard and Kurt quickly followed with their own rifles. Kurt was able to take another wolf square in the mouth, blasting the creature's jaw off. However, Bernard hesitated too long, and the big wolf was on him, so that his rifle quickly became an expensive club as he thrashed widely to keep the monster at bay. Adrenaline dilated time for the 4 men, making what surely could not have been more than a few seconds seem like an eternity. As the advantage of range was taken from them, the men went for saber and axe, but the fangs of the wolf were more suited to the work of intimate death than the clumsy humans before them. Kurt was the first to fall, the saber still half in its sheath as the 2-mouthed wolf leaped up, the sword arm twisting and using its bulk to drive him to the floor. Ludolf was able to free his hatchet and swung wildly at a wolf with glowing eyes. Bernard continued using his hunting rifle as a blunt instrument. His powerful arms brought the improvised club down over and over again, but the Alpha was just too quick. It waited for him to rear up, to expend his energy for that downward swing, and then it darted away as the stock impacted the ground ineffectually. Each lift was slightly slower, each strike slightly weaker than the one before it. As the big man was sucking in air, another of the pack darted in behind him, his teeth digging into the meat of Bernard's calf and ripping away a thick chunk. He screamed as his leg buckled beneath him. No sooner had he struck the ground than the big Alpha was upon him, his fangs snapping closed on the front of his head, nose and mouth disappearing into the creature's maw as bone gave way beneath primal muscle. Seeing their band reduced to 2 in an instant, Ludolf landed a powerful kick into the side of the wolf in front of him, throwing the creature back and sparing himself the extra second to retrieve the pistol from his belt and discharge it into the beast. It wasn't a fatal shot, at least not immediately, but the ball exploding into its gut took the fight out of it. "Run, boy!" he shouted to Alwyn and turned on his heel. The younger hunter followed quickly behind him, discharging another shot, although this one accomplished nothing save to cover their retreat. Ludolf chanced to look back before they descended over a snow-covered hill and deeper into the forest. He could see the wolf he had wounded, a skinny beast with bone spurs that pushed through its skin at the shoulder and elbows. The pistol ball to its gut had rendered it incapable of standing. It lay there, whining and exhaling blood-flecked drool. As the alpha approached, the wounded wolf frantically tried to scramble up on its front paws, trying to straighten out its hindquarters so that it could at least crawl effectively. Its ears lay flat on its skull as it shot the pack leader a pleading expression, but it need not have bothered. The alpha latched onto its neck, clear to the bone in an instant, and twisted hard before wrenching its teeth free, sending a spray of arterial blood to cover the snow beneath them. As this happened, the other wolves set about eating, not caring whether they feasted upon a hunter or one of their fallen pack. Some of them devoured the flesh, while others just ripped and spat, seeming to enjoy the act of defilement itself rather than the meat. The 2 hunters cleared the high rise and were quickly over the bank. Ludolf almost lost his footing entirely in the snow, but Alwyn was beside him in an instant, catching his free arm and pulling him forward. They didn't so much descend the incline as ricochet from one outcropping to the next as they zigzagged down the steep fall-off. Once they returned to solid ground, they split again, although Alwyn was careful not to outpace Ludolf too badly. The older hunter's bad hip was beginning to act up on him again. What had started as pain had escalated to the point of locking up his left side, causing him to use his left leg more as a walking stick than a natural appendage, pushing it down stiffly and pushing off again as he wobbled from side to side. There was no telling how long they were running before Ludolf's heart was beating too quickly and his breath coming too fast for him to push on any further. The cold air scoured his throat and stung his lungs as he drank it in agonized mouthfuls. Looking over at Alwyn, he saw a moment of consideration pass over the young man's boyish features. He still had some flight in him, his breathing measured, and he paused on the balls of his feet as he cast a look behind them. When it was clear that no crimson shapes pursued them over the snow, Alwyn strode over to Ludolf, placing his back against the tree and his hand on the veteran's shoulder. "What the hell were those things? They looked more hell-born than anything of this earth." "Can't say I've seen the like," Ludolf said, reaching down and retrieving a flask from his belt. He chanced a quick nip to ease the shaking in his hands. The false warmth of the whiskey chased away some of Winter's sting, and he took another gulp just for good measure. "Wolves are beasts, and only as evil as their hunger makes them. They will eat men if other food is scarce, but we killed enough of their kind that they've learned to fear us too. There was no fear in those beasts. They were in it for the killing more than the eating." "Kurt and Bernard," Alwyn stated, clearly trying to think of what to say to ease the loss. He knew that the 3 men had been traveling together for some time before he joined up, and there is a powerful bond in those who fight side by side. "They knew the risks," Ludolf snorted, and set his jaw in a way that communicated there would be time for nice words and memories later, when they weren't caught in the woods in midwinter. "Now, how do we get out of this blasted wood?" Alwyn scanned the woods around him for any sign. He looked backward across their wide, splayed tracks, knowing that they had left the road back that way to the east. Yet to retrace themselves meant a greater likelihood of attracting the wolves' attention. They were probably still feasting on the bodies of the hunters and their own pack-mates, a meal that would feed a normal wolf for weeks, but something about those eyes, the hunger that had nothing to do with meat, made Alwyn believe they would not be satisfied long by a single slaughter. Orphan? Alwyn shrugged. When they had been hired by the people of Lungolan, they had mentioned the more northerly town as being larger with more trading opportunities. If they couldn't judge the direction of the road, it would be the next closest destination. Ludolf nodded slowly, working his jaw back and forth as if the idea had grit in it. Course, wolves were hunting the northern road. That is where they picked up the mother and child. If they got a taste for people, it seems like they would keep moving closer to the market towns with more travelers. Makes sense, but it's cold, and it's only getting colder. Wolves can be shot, but you can't shoot the north wind. Ludolf let out a dry chuckle without any real humor. At least you can shoot the wolves. I missed that shot at 30 paces. Would have been clear through his eye in my younger days. Well, then how about you concentrate on walking, and I'll watch your old back, Alwyn said, and helped his companion to his feet. The two walked north as the light began to fail them. The locals called this stretch of woods Carlson's Crop, apparently named after an old lord who had loved the trees more than he loved people. While his domain had been stripped before he took power, he made sure that they were resown thicker, just so he had a place to get lost for hours. Folks say he spent longer and longer in his private forest the older he got, and the more he wished to avoid his bickering and backstabbing descendants, until one day he didn't come out again. Of course, with stories like that, there is supposed to be a strange apparition that appears to travelers who get lost in the woods in order to guide them to safety before vanishing before their eyes. But the two lost hunters were granted no such providence. Instead, they walked until cold and darkness forced them to make camp. The absent specter wasn't even for a pile of dry twigs, and their poor excuse for a campfire gave little in the way of warmth or light. Believe it or not, this is not the worst winter night I've seen. Ludolf's voice broke the silence as they crouched close to the sputtering flame. You're right, I don't believe you, Alwyn returned with a small load of lean sticks. It's true. Some 15 years ago. I was with a different crew then, had a proper title and everything. We cleared out the rotters and wandering beasts down south. Wasn't a mercenary then, but a proper soldier who followed orders instead of coin. Well, what made you stop? Let an old man finish his story, Ludolf said crossly. It was all for a city named Slovak and a lord by the name of Marcuser. Though you wouldn't have heard of that, either. Me and my boys went out into the cold on instructions to locate a horned beast that came with the winter wind and ran amok in the outer homesteads. We were caught up in a bad storm and trapped for weeks in the wilderness without any sign of a monster. Just the cold, that endless snow. We ran out of food. And when the first man died after taking a bad fall, we did the civilized thing and divided him among the living. Alwyn took a big gulp and pulled his coat closer around himself. Ludolf could tell the younger man had never faced a choice such as that, never felt the hunger so deep that it gnaws at your bones on the inside. Ludolf knew that he should stop. He knew the boy needn't be digging up these stories with their companions dead and the wolves on their heels. But once he'd uncorked those memories, there was no putting them back in the bottle. Still remember all of us bent over eating, not able to look at each other. We were crying, not from sadness, but from the feeling of having something inside our guts again. It was that bad meat in our belly that gave us the strength to brave the snow and make it back to Slovak. We almost walked right past it, so buried it was by the snow and empty of any living soul. While we had left on our damned hunt, the beast had come for our homes. Did you ever find that monster? Alwyn squeaked, his dry throat causing his voice to crack like his balls were dropping all over again. Ludolf shook his head and offered the boy a sip from the flask. No, we never even saw it. I think it was made of ice and moonlight. As soon as the north wind stopped blowing, it vanished again. What did it taste like? Alwyn said, torn between horror and curiosity. Best meat I've ever had, Ludolf shrugged, and Alwyn instinctively pulled away. Of course, I was so hungry that I bet a rat would have moved me to tears. Hunger makes monsters of us all. They both slept in shifts after that, shivering in their bedrolls. While Ludolf was conscious, he scanned the woods around him, his rifle never more than a finger's breadth from his hand. Alwyn kept casting looks back at his companion, imagining a bearded old man shoving chunks of flesh into his mouth and licking it clear again, tears rolling down his cheeks, growing thick with filth before plummeting to the ground. They started again with the first light of day. The sheet of the ground reflected the white light of the sun so keenly that it almost cut the eyes. The forest itself, so alive in the dark of night, was almost reverentially quiet with the sun high in the sky. Alwyn took point, but had to frequently check back on his fellow hunter. Ludolf, his hip still in bad shape, was moving in a determined trudge. While far from swift, the older man knew he could maintain the pace for hours if need be. Alwyn felt his fear and frustration grow in equal measure every time he had to consciously slow his pace. After stopping again to give Ludolf a minute, Alwyn's eyes went down to his boots, and he saw large canine tracks in the snow round him. Some had 3 digits, others as many as 6 or 7, and the hunter was reminded of all the variations on the lupine form he saw in that mismatched pack. Even more startling was the presence of barefoot human feet and handprints intermingled with those of the wolves. They all appeared fresh, and while it would make sense that the wolves could be chasing the man or men, the way the tracks interlaced gave Alwyn the disturbing image that man and beast hunted together. As Ludolf caught up with him, Alwyn drew his companion's attention to the tracks, and they purposefully adjusted their heading. When the sun was coming down from its epoch by the time they found the road again, and while fatigue had found them both, the snaking line of civilization brought with it a rush of relief. After stopping a moment for dried meat and bread, they pushed onward. Roads were the little cutaways that expanded humanity's hold. They served as a line holding the wilderness at bay, and their boon was as much psychological as practical. Roads, even the most dangerous ones, always promised a settlement at the end, and both hunters would take the seediest slum town over the unforgiving stretch of Carlson's crop. It was at the edge of the wood, as they came up from a dip in the round, that they could finally make out the sight of Orphan's walls in the distance before them. This brief moment of relief was shattered entirely by a primal howl that burst forth from the woods at their back. At this point in their journey, Alwyn's youthful stride had failed him, and he had been reduced to the same trudge as his companion. The sound of their encroaching predators, along with the proximity of their salvation, brought a new wave of adrenaline to them both. Alwyn grabbed onto Ludolf's arm, and they began to hurry along the road. After their previous doomed skirmish, they both knew they couldn't shoot their way free, but they unslung their guns, hoping that a well-placed shot might buy them time to reach the walls. As the 2 hunters ran, they kept casting panicked glances over their shoulders. The pack quickly burst from the tree line in full pursuit, led as before by the 6-legged alpha. The cold was enough that their breath ghosted from between their clenched teeth in a fog, giving the impression of a smoke-belching hell-beast, as their lunging strides quickly closed the distance between themselves and the fleeing hunters. Alwyn spun, cracking off a shot leader, but the creature moved like a crimson blur, lunging to the side at the perfect moment to leave the bullet impacting the ground harmlessly. As another wolf sped forward, its jaw open and leaking drool as it tasted the kill on the wind, Ludolf stopped and spun on his heel to put a bullet right into the beast's bloodshot eye. While the shot was good, the momentary lapse of momentum was enough for the alpha to slam into Ludolf and knock him clean off his feet. Alwyn turned when he saw his companion fall, and he paused for a long moment. Orphan was a few dozen yards before him, his companion 5 yards behind. If they chose the easy prey as before, he might be able to make it. Ludolf could not see his companion's hesitation. His entire world was filled by the massive shape of the alpha wolf mounted on top of him. The creature leaned down, its muzzle still caked with gore from an earlier feast, and the old hunter braced, waiting for the creature's teeth to pierce his skin. Instead, the beast merely smelled him. A strange rumble came from inside the creature's chest that Ludolf had never heard before. "Get away from him!" Alwyn yelled, pulling steel and rushing over the snow. The Alpha leapt backward to avoid the clumsy charge, then ducked a wide slash. Tired from the long march and the desperate flight, Alwyn's every movement was too slow and lacked any hope of striking the man-eating beast. As the Alpha captured the hunter's full attention, another wolf with oozing sores decorating the side of his face and neck slipped in behind and sank his teeth into the meat of Alwyn's calf, causing the man to drop to his knees with a pained scream. By this point, Ludolf had found his feet again, and he drew the loaded pistol from his belt, pointing the barrel straight at the Alpha. The red-furred beast met the threat with a calm gaze, and in Ludolf's periphery he could make out the rest of the pack fanning out around him. He almost fancied he could hear the Alpha telling him, "Yes, you can shoot me, but they will rip you to ribbons before the smoke clears the barrel." The wolves were between him and the walls of Orphan now. The gate was only 90-some feet from where he stood, but it might as well be on the other side of the Eltane Sea. The Alpha cocked his head at Alwyn and took a step back. The young man was bleeding quickly. One hand still held his saber in his shaking grip, while the other made a vain attempt to stop the crimson flow from his ruined leg. He met Ludolf's gaze, his jaw clenching in a rictus of pain. There was no choice, really. One corpse or two in the snow. Ludolf discharged the pistol into Alwyn's skull, and the body hit the snow. A few of the wolves went over to the wolf that Ludolf had slain earlier, and began ripping away mouthfuls of meat. The Alpha looked to Ludolf expectantly, some unspoken authority holding off the rest of the pack until the old hunter was given the right to claim his kill. Ludolf took the fallen blade and cut off a strip of raw muscle from Alwyn's calf before bringing it to his mouth. As the meat crossed his lips, the old hunter's tears hit the snow.